Number 2, monarch butterflies spend the local winter hibernating on trees in certain forests. Local environmental groups have organized tours of the forest in an effort to protect the butterflies' habitat against woodcutters. Unfortunately, the tourists trample most of the small shrubs that are necessary to the survival of any monarch butterflies that fall off the trees. Therefore, the tour groups themselves are endangering the monarch butterfly population. Which one of the following would it be most helpful to know in evaluating the argument? Okay, so we'll want to find the argument. The argument is right here. The tour groups are endangering the butterfly population, right? And then so whatever we pick as our answer, it needs to help us either say yes to that or no to that, right? So let's look at A. The amount of forest land suitable for monarch butterfly hibernation that is not currently used by monarch butterflies for hibernation. So would it be helpful to know how much land that could be used for hibernation is not being used for hibernation? Probably not, right? If we knew about land that the butterflies are not currently in, that's not going to help us figure out whether the tour groups are endangering the butterfly population. So we can cross out A. B, the amount of wood cut each year by woodcutters in forests used by the monarch butterflies for hibernation. If we know about the amount of wood cut each year, that's really only related to this part here, right? When they mention the woodcutters. So the monarch butterflies hibernate in certain trees. Local environmental groups are protecting the habitat against people that are cutting the wood down. But that doesn't tell us whether the tour groups are endangering the butterfly population, right? This tells us, B would tell us whether the woodcutters are, the extent to which the woodcutters are harming the butterflies and their habitat. So B would help us evaluate one of the, it would help us learn more about one of the premises, but that premise isn't, learning more about that premise wouldn't help us figure out more about our actual argument, if that makes sense. Our argument is about the tour groups and whether they're endangering the butterfly population, and B is talking about the amount of wood that woodcutters cut, and that's not directly related to this final part of our argument that we're actually trying to evaluate, right? So we can cross out B for that reason. C, the amount of plant life trampled by the tourists that is not necessary to the survival of monarch butterflies. Okay, interesting. C is talking about the tourists and the amount of plant life that they trample, but it's talking about the amount that's not necessary to the survival of the monarch butterflies. The argument is talking about what the tourists trample that is necessary to the survival of the butterflies, right? We're talking about how when the tourists step on some of the small shrubs, the butterflies need that to survive, and that's why we're saying they're endangering the butterfly population. And so if we find out about plant life that's not necessary to the survival of the butterflies, that's not going to help us evaluate the argument about the shrubs that are necessary to the survival of the butterflies, right? So we can cross out C for that reason. D, the proportion of trees cut down by the woodcutters each year that are cut in the forests used by monarch butterflies for hibernation. Okay, this is again about trees being cut down, right? And like B, that helps us figure out more about certain premises maybe and might add in details, but are those details helpful or useful in evaluating the argument? Is it helpful to know how many trees are cut down? The proportion of the trees that are cut down that are actually used by the butterflies for hibernation? That's not helpful for our argument, right? Because the argument that we're trying to evaluate, again, it's about the tour groups. It's about whether the tour groups are endangering the butterfly population. If 50% of the trees are cut down versus 25%, that's not really helping us evaluate the argument that we're actually looking at, right? So we can cross out D for that reason. E, the proportion of hibernating monarch butterflies that fall off the trees. Okay, so E would work really, really well to help us evaluate the argument. So if the proportion of hibernating monarch butterflies that falls off the trees is really, really tiny, if it's like less than 1%, the tour groups aren't really endangering the monarch butterfly population, right? They're not endangering the population. They might be endangering a few butterflies here and there, but they're not going to be responsible for severely endangering the population itself. Versus if the proportion of the hibernating monarch butterflies that falls off of the trees is like 90%, or like a very high proportion, then the tour groups would be endangering the monarch butterfly population by trampling these shrubs, right? Because then these shrubs would be very important to the survival of like 90% of the butterflies, right? So answering E a certain way makes the argument significantly stronger. Answering E in another way makes the argument much weaker and makes it a bad argument. And so E would be a good answer for this